You're listening to Risk and Resolve. And now for your hosts, Ben Connor and Todd Hufford.
Welcome back to another episode of the Risk and Resolve pod with your co-hosts Ben and Todd. We have a special guest today, Brett Billups, who's the CHRO of Marketplace Chaplains, as well as CEO and author of Biblical HR. Brett, thanks for being with us here today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a joy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's just start out. If you could tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and your background.
I have been in professionally, I've been in human resources for about 30 years in both private and public companies in a variety of different roles, both as a support mid-level manager, but also leading the HR function for the last two companies that I've been. One was a large construction company of about 6,000 employees, and now I'm a CHRO for Marketplace Chaplains. I have experience in public companies, Kraft Foods for about 13 years, Mondelez International, and Iron Mountain. That was a wonderful learning experience from a public company standpoint. Got exposed to a lot of different things. Personally, I've been married for 36 years in a couple of weeks to a Green Bay, Wisconsin girl. And actually, we lived up there for about 15 years, and 3 of our 4 kids were born there. We moved to Dallas in 2006 with Kraft Foods, and we have 4 children. The 2 middle ones are married, and I have 4 grandkids. So my daughter, and they're with one daughter. So she has 4 boys, 8 and under.
Wow.
Which we've kept them overnight a couple of times, but yeah, that's it takes a lot out of us old people. From a spiritual standpoint, I grew up on a farm and ranch in the middle of Texas. We went to church every Sunday, but that was just what you were supposed to do in the middle of Texas. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't a believer. I didn't realize what that looked like. I just felt like if I just followed all the rules, then I was doing what I was supposed to do as a Christian. It wasn't until I got really sick about 20 years ago that I started getting more serious about my faith. And when I did that, we started homeschooling our kids and growing in, Chrissy and I started growing in our relationship, and then really understanding what it looks like to be a godly husband and father. And we have been growing ever since.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. So you had a face-to-face with your Creator moment being sick that really changed your faith.
I did, very much so.
Yeah. So what led you into the HR field? I'm guessing that you didn't wake up, or maybe you weren't taught at a young age about HR, and that was potentially your dream from the get-go. So how did you get involved in the field of HR?
That's a great question. I kind of stumbled into it. I actually I graduated from Texas Tech University with a degree in advertising and minored in marketing after growing up on a farm and ranch, which was kind of unusual. And then when I got married, my wife's father owned a company in Wisconsin. And so I went to work in the operations part of that company. It was a small polyethylene bag manufacturing company. And when he sold the company, the new owners asked me if I wanted to stay in operations or move into human resources. And I saw a need in human resources. There were only about 80 people, but I said, "Oh, I would like to help the people and from a human resources standpoint." I had no clue what I was getting myself into. So the new owner brought one of his former HR people in to help me build the HR function, establish an HR department. And that's how I really got my start. And from there, I was with them for about 3 or 4 years, transferred to another small private company. And then I was there for about 2 years. And that's when I got on with Kraft Foods from an HR standpoint at their largest pizza manufacturing plant in Wisconsin. And then that's where I cut my chops from an HR standpoint. I was with Kraft for about 14 years. I transferred to Kraft Corporate in 2004. Worked at Kraft Corporate for about 2 years, and then transferred in the sales function to Texas in about 2006. And then at 2013, transferred to Iron Mountain, which is another public company.
Yep.
And then I got asked if I wanted to lead the HR function for a large employee-owned construction company here in Dallas. And I did that for about 5 years before coming here as the CHRO.
Yeah. What did you said you saw a need in HR or with the people element at that first role? What did that look like at that point in time? What need did you see that you're like, I want to go to that?
Yeah, the need I saw was that I think there was a disconnect between the owners and the floor people, and I wanted to try and bridge that gap as best that I could, because I saw a lot of animosity between the two, and I wanted to try and repair some of that communication. It wasn't tremendously bad, but I just saw that there was a gap there that I wanted to try and fill.
So you recently wrote your book, Biblical HR, where it really is like a how-to guide. So tell me a little bit about just your reason, or like what was stirring in you to kind of start doing that.
What happened is I really kind of started writing for myself, because about 10 or 12 years ago, I really started struggling with how to apply my faith to my work. And what does that look like? Because I would go to church on Sunday, listen to a wonderful sermon, wonderful worship, and then spend the rest of the day dreading going back into the workplace the next morning, because I knew what I had to deal with. I knew there was a lot of things on my plate that I needed to deal with, and I would dread it. And so I realized I needed to bridge the gap between Sunday and Monday morning, and how do I do that? And so I started looking at the specific situations that I was having to deal with from an HR standpoint, and then started writing, okay, how do I deal with these from a biblical standpoint? Like dealing with a difficult boss, a difficult employee, a difficult coworker, how to do a performance review, how to conduct an interview, all of these things from a biblical perspective. And so I just started writing for my own benefit. Okay, how do I deal with this issue from a biblical perspective? And I would look at a passage of scripture, pull out the biblical principles, and then I started writing, what can I do before, during, and after this particular situation to bring biblical principles to bear in specific situations in the workplace? So I started writing it for my own benefit, so I could deal with them. And then a friend of mine encouraged me, Brett, you need to get this out and help people with that. And I said, maybe when I retire, I'll put this in a book form and do that. He said, no, you probably need to do that now. So I did. I finished, I presented it to a hybrid kind of publishing company, Morgan James, and they accepted it right away. And I finished it, and it was published, and it was something that was the risk for me. That was a risk of, okay, putting that out there. Okay, is this really going to benefit people or not? Is it just the ramblings of a crazy HR guy that has been in the business for far too long? So, but it seems to resonate to certain people, and that's all I wanted to do. Okay, it helped me, but how can it help other managers or believers in the workplace to deal with these specific issues? Because one of the things that I would deal with from an HR standpoint, even from mid-level managers, how do I deal with this specific situation? And I would walk them through how to deal with them, but they have scripture that they can also utilize to bridge that gap. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take people to scripture, take people to those biblical principles to deal with things that they may not have an in-house counsel to deal with that.
Brett, you mentioned it was a risk to put that book out there. Can you identify what risks you felt at that time? What truly was at risk by publishing that story? Those ideas.
Well, because I've never written a book before. Okay. So it was one of those that, okay, I have no clue what I'm doing. So I'm just going to take a step and in faith and just take one step at a time, and see what happens. It's not one of those things that, okay, I'm gonna write a book to get rich.
Right.
I mean,
you had a job.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that I felt called to do and called to help. And so is it going to help people or not? The risk was saying something inaccurate, saying something that was unbiblical, saying something that would take people off of the right course.
Right.
And so I was very purposeful in being as biblical and theologically sound as possible.
And who did you?
I had a friend of mine who was a pastor, went to seminary. He was one of the editors of this as well.
Yeah.
And made sure that I was theologically sound and biblically sound as I started presenting these things.
You mentioned, I think I've got the timeline right, that it seemed like halfway through your career thus far, your faith began deepening. It seems like you had a season with public companies of kind of a stale faith, but it also seems like you had time at public companies with a stronger faith. Do I have that timeline right?
Yeah, I think so, because when I started writing the book, that's when I was with one of the public companies, and I realized that the public company, they have a tremendous amount of resources.
Sure.
Okay, so I just relied on them. So I could do that, but then I started to see a little bit of disconnect between my faith and my work. And that's when I just started, there's got to be more to it than just following public company policy and laws and
regs. Yeah.
More than that. And then as I started getting into it, Todd, I realized that, I don't know, especially from a human resources standpoint, how do people do it without the discernment of the Holy Spirit?
Right.
I mean, it's like, if you don't have that, then all you have is company policy and laws and compliance and regulations and all of that stuff. But there's more to it than that. There's a spiritual component to everything that we do.
Were you working at one of those public companies when the book was released?
No, it was not released until I was leading the construction company organization.
Okay. And was that company a faith-forward company, or was that a risk too?
It was I would say that it was there has some faith components to it. I mean, it's Texas, Dallas based. There's a lot of faith-based people that are within the organization, but it was still a profit-driven organization. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel a hesitancy or a risk in releasing that book while you were in that position? And did you, I guess, since it was a book about your professional knowledge as opposed to some off-topic discussion, did you feel the need, and did you kind of run it past, whoever you reported to kind of A, let them know, B, sort of get their tacit approval?
No, I didn't. It was one of those that, yeah, you're right. Putting something like that out there, and I was made aware of that by one of the company presidents. He knew about it. So, and he said, "You're putting yourself out there. That's when you draw that line in the sand, or you put that stake in the ground. I mean, that's something you can't come back from, especially in the environment of the political environment that was 5 years ago."
Mm-hmm.
So that was a risk, and putting that faith component out there from an HR standpoint. Yeah, that was a risk.
I think it's interesting too. I mean, HR is the cultural champion for any business, not only internally, but also of like what bleeds in from culture in general, political or otherwise, or social, that comes into the company, right?
Right.
So how did you navigate when you put yourself out there like that? And you probably did before the book. You put yourself out there in general as your faith being really important to you, as you mentioned earlier. How do I make decisions without the Holy Spirit? Did you ever find yourself getting challenged about, well, you can't bring religion into the workplace, or how did you handle that?
Well, you don't have to. What I've learned is that we were created and designed to operate by biblical principles. We just were. And they work in the workplace, whether we call them biblical principles or not. That's just how we were designed. So when you purposely act and respond in a godly, biblical way, you don't have to call them, this is from the Bible. I'm operating from a religious perspective. Now, if somebody asks me, how are you grounded?
Right.
What does that look like? I'm a Christian. That's how that's grounded. But that's especially in the workplace. The first thing to do is operate and manage by godly biblical principles, because again, that's how we're designed. That's how we work. That's how things function. So as when you do that, it honors God, and you acknowledge Him in your in the way that you do that.
Yeah, honors the Lord and honors His image bearers. So you're right, that natural connection. So in the book, literally, it is a manual. It goes through those topics that are can be really difficult. And if you don't mind, I'd like to obviously want to encourage all of our listeners to go get a copy. It's a fantastic read. I got through it quickly, and I'm a slow reader.
Well, it's not one of those that you have to read cover to cover. I mean, it's one of those that
Right.
If you have a situation, you turn to chapter 12, you turn to chapter 8. And it's not one of those that is you sit down and read it all in its entirety. It's just as you need it. It's a reference, basically.
Right. Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I think from an encouraging standpoint, it may be easy to live out your beliefs because everything is great. But I think what's interesting in this book, it talks a lot about like conflict resolution is one of the chapters. Managing poor performance is one of the chapters. So we're talking about things where there is like human conflict, and how does the Bible, or how does the Bible reference behavior in those areas? What is your mindset around pursuing people in conflict, or even when there's poor performance? Just give us a little highlight of the framing around that.
Sure. I think the conflict resolution chapter is one of my favorites. It's one of the last ones that I wrote before launching the book. And one thing that we have to realize is that resolving conflict is God's job. That's not my job. I mean, sometimes I have a tendency to think, hey, I've been in HR for 30 years. I can sit these people down and we can come to a mediation and resolution, but maybe not. So coming to the realization that I may have to live and deal with unresolved conflict in a different way, because it may not happen. God has to prepare the hearts to resolve conflict. And if it doesn't happen, then you have to deal with the situation from a behavioral standpoint and a performance standpoint rather than a conflict resolution standpoint. So that's the major thing that I learned. I share a story in the book where a mentor of mine used to be an executive for GE, General Electric. And he had a conflict with one of his coworkers, another divisional president. And so the region executive scheduled a meeting with these two individuals, him and this other person he was having a conflict with, on a Saturday morning. So they came to his office at 8 a.m. and on his conference table he had a coffee pot, and he said, I want you guys to sit down and resolve your conflict, and if you can't, I will resolve it in my way. They looked at each other after a few minutes and said, okay, we got the message. So it's contingent on the individuals and their heart to be able to resolve the conflict. And the leader knew that he wasn't going to change their hearts toward each other. They had to do that. He was going to deal with it. If they couldn't change their hearts, he was going to have to deal with it from a performance standpoint or behavioral standpoint. So that's probably one of the key learnings from a conflict resolution. Now, for performance management, one of the things that I have learned as a believer in HR is that sometimes believers struggle with wanting to hold people accountable. So they don't want to be seen as impatient or not gracious, not merciful toward the person, or not forgiving toward the person. But holding people accountable to godly behavior and godly principles is biblical. And so, but you have to do that in a godly way, and approaching accountability in a loving way is actually very biblical. And the more that you ignore it, you're not doing them a service. You're actually encouraging the ungodly behavior. So we have to be courageous enough in our faith and in our ability to confront and hold people accountable, but do it in a godly, biblical, patient way. And that's what I tried to do in the performance management chapter.
Brett, you got any thoughts on how Christians got there to that point where they view it as they have a hard time holding people accountable? Do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think what happens is that there's so many unknowns these days, because people can sue you for anything. They can sue you for a discrimination. They can sue you for unlawful termination. So there's a fear there of making the wrong move, taking the wrong step. But on the flip side of that, I don't also want to be seen. There's a fear of confrontation because I just don't have the tools to do it. So it's a double-edged sword.
But you made the observation that you felt like Christians have a harder time of that than maybe a non-believer would. Any thoughts on why you think that is?
Well, we want to be seen as I think a loving, patient, soft, kind-hearted person. And holding people accountable will make people mad.
Yeah.
So
a joyful heart doesn't seem like someone that's, holding the line, right?
Right. And so it's like there's a fear there. Okay, there's a tension there of I want to be kind-hearted. I want to be generous toward this person. I want to be, and if I try to hold them accountable, even if they're going through a tough time personally, I can't do it. But they're going through a divorce. How can I hold them accountable to their job performance? Well, there's other things that you can do to address that. So the major thing that I see from a believer standpoint is just not understanding, number one, that it's our biblical responsibility to hold people accountable to godly behavior. But also you're being not addressing it is actually being unkind, unloving.
Right.
You're not, it's more self-focused
Absolutely.
than other-focused.
Yeah. It's hard for you, but it's really the best thing for them.
Correct.
When you think about the book and you put it out in the world, and like you said, it was a risk. It probably went places you never imagined. That could be from a geographic standpoint. It could be just to the highest levels of some big company that you never thought it would go. Obviously, it's still in its flight path of going out there in the world. Maybe tell us a couple stories of where it's gone that you never would have thought it would have gone.
Well, I will tell you that what God has taught me is that this is His book, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
So after I left the construction company, I branched out on my own. After the book launched, I said, okay, I'm going to use this as a launch for a consulting company or something along those lines. And it just never took off.
Hmm.
So because this is a very niche kind of resource for people. And then, but as a result of my company and the book, one of the individuals from Marketplace Chaplain reached out to me. Said, hey, we want to tap into your network. We're Marketplace Chaplains. We can, if you want to, if you would recommend us to your network, that would be helpful. And then I just asked, and then I learned that they were looking for a CHRO. And
Convenient.
And it was 2 weeks later, I was working here.
Wow.
So, and then what happened as a result of that is that the field people at Marketplace Chaplains were giving this to
All the clients.
Yep. And in their the HR people that what they were supporting, and it got out more than I could have.
Yeah, you found your distribution partner, didn't you?
Yeah, and it's like unknowingly. I mean, so God said, no, that's not the way I want to distribute it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the way I want to distribute it. So that's kind of amazing.
And how many calls for a sequel have you had?
A couple. The sequel would be, this was written primarily to basic businesses. I mean, I think there's a need for biblical HR for churches, ministries, and nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
So because that's a little bit different animal. So I think I have thought about, okay, how do I need to customize this to appeal to that?
What about a book that appeals to the employee, to the team member, to help them lead up from a biblical view to their HR that may have some pieces of the puzzle, but maybe not all the pieces of the puzzle?
And some of that is, I try to appeal to Christians in the workplace at whether you're an employee or mid-level manager. So some of the chapters kind of appeal to employees that are dealing with their boss, or employees that are dealing with specific situations in the workplace. So I try to deal with some of that. So some of the audience kind of crosses over a little bit. But so from an employee standpoint, I try to speak to Christians in the workplace regardless of what level that they were. That's what I tried to do.
A couple chapters I wanted to kind of double click into as well. They kind of relate. Is you talk about like workplace stress and work-life balance. I was even just listening to a podcast even last night just about just how stressed just our culture is, and just how empty people's tanks are. As you look at addressing kind of that element more, even like the mental health side of business and how businesses can come along their workforce, if you wouldn't mind just kind of double clicking into that stress element as well as work-life balance.
You know what? I'm going to combine those two, and I'll tell you why. Is when I started researching work-life balance is a misnomer. It doesn't really exist, because you know why? We have one life.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a life at work or a personal life. We have one, and that is, am I honoring God, and am I honoring Him in everything that I do personally and professionally? So to try and separate those two, that's what I was doing for years. I was trying to separate those two, which caused a lot of stress. So if I just focus on a singular focus of honoring God in everything that I do and giving everything else over to Him, that's where the work-life balance and the stress is. That's where the release is. There's certain things that I can practice. I can go for a walk. I can do some exercise. But the major thing is to spend time on your knees in prayer, focusing on your relationship with Him and Him alone. And that's where your primary focus of one life and stress comes to a head. Giving that over to Him. So that's the major thing. That's the major thing that I would focus on from a work-life balance and a stress standpoint. Is just your one-on-one relationship with Christ and your Creator, and spend more time on your knees in prayer. Spend more time in the Word, just focusing on that relationship.
Is there a chapter or two that almost were in the book that weren't in the book, or something that you mentioned obviously from Todd's question about part 2 is more in the faith community, but is there a chapter or something that you've learned that you're like, I could have put this one, and this is the secret chapter?
You know what? I tried to think about. I tried to narrow it down to. There were some chapters that I had said, no, I need to incorporate that into this one. It kind of dovetails into this one. I tried to narrow it down to pretty buckets of situations that people would have to deal with. I will tell you that the most difficult chapter I think that I had to write was the one on diversity. So And that was written 5 or 6 years ago, that diversity was a very hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
So try and addressing that, excuse me. So trying to address that from a biblical perspective without, I don't want to say offending people, but I'm sure it did in some respects, but some of the cultural kind of political correctness that was going on at the time, but addressing that head on from a biblical standpoint, I wanted to make sure that it resonated with people and didn't turn them off. One of the stories that I actually shared in the book was that when I was with one of the public companies, they had diversity metrics, and public companies had that at one time. And so we would measure diversity candidates on how many got promoted, how many were hired, how many were people of color, how many were women. And so there was one time I was presenting those metrics at a region level because that's what we were kind of held accountable to.
Right.
A little while later, a manager who was a person of color got up and he said, I want to be measured by my performance, not by my color, not by my race, not by my gender. And that struck me, and that we were doing a potential disservice when we were only looking at race, gender, and ethnicity. And we were measuring that. And it's like, it's an insult to people who want to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what struck me. That was the most difficult chapter, I would say, to write, but it was the most rewarding.
Have you gotten feedback around that chapter?
A little bit. I actually, before I put it in the book, I sent it out to people I respect who are diverse, and said, give me your feedback on this. What do I need to change? And so I got that feedback, and I was able to, from a biblical perspective, line it up to what resonated from a biblical standpoint.
Yeah, I think, as believers, especially over the last, you mentioned a couple of years, diversity is a huge topic of conversation. And as I'm trying to digest it, there is a possibility for how secular culture defines diversity. There is how the Bible defines diversity.
That's correct.
And some will overlap and some won't. And just navigating through that, through people who believe many different things that are in a business.
We're to celebrate people's diversity. Enjoy.
We're all image bearers.
Correct. We're all image bearers. We're to celebrate that, but from a biblical perspective,
right,
and not a worldly perspective.
Brett, you've got a position now where you're leading individuals who are inside of many, many companies and trying to care for their people. So you've got some perspective on what's happening within these companies, just at least from a high level within the organization. Can you give us a couple things that you feel like businesses are doing well right now in this HR realm as it relates to taking care of people, and a couple things that maybe they're getting a C or a D grade in how they haven't quite mastered this? And it's a bigger question, kind of in aggregate, but what do you see the American business doing well in the realm of HR of any size, and what do you see them still struggling with?
I think from an HR standpoint, HR is in a very a difficult kind of position within an organization, because you have to have a relationship with the employees, but also have to care for the business needs of the organization. That's a difficult balance to maintain. one of the things that we can do as an organization is that we can come in and have a confidential kind of resource that people can speak with and express concern to without having to worry that it's getting back to the organization.
Right.
So if I'm struggling with my boss or a work-related situation, I can express that to my chaplain without any kind of fear of retaliation. So HR people, they don't have that kind of flexibility to just deal with individuals on a personal care level. And that's just by, it's not necessarily that they don't want to, it's just by design primarily. And people want to care for their employees. And that's why they hire somebody like us to come in. And so from an HR standpoint, it helps with retention. It helps with employee relations. It helps with communication, and just being another person there that cares for the employees at a deep personal level. We've prevented hundreds of suicides over the years, and that's a tremendous impact. And we just passed this year. Last year we had over 100,000 gospel presentations. So just bringing that being the hands and feet of Christ in the workplace is a tremendous resource for the HR people that they have difficulty stepping into, either by design or time, energy.
It's almost like the American unions missed a real big opportunity here. They've got the relationships in some situations with employers and employees. I know it's not part of their DNA, but they could have layered that chaplain service in years ago and been providing that same level of service that organizations like yours are doing today in mass.
Yeah, I would agree. You're right.
Missed opportunity.
Well, Brett, I really appreciate you sharing your story and bringing the book to life for us today. Again, I recommend to all of our listeners to grab a copy of Biblical HR. But before you go, we have two questions that we ask of our guests. So I'll go into that segment. So first question is, what is a risk that you have taken that's changed your life?
It was writing the book and putting it out there. That's what changed. That changed a lot of things. That alone helped me to align my faith with my work. So from a personal level, that changed my life.
Awesome. Second, last question. What's unfinished that you have the resolve to complete?
Oh, I think I've got one or two other books in me that I need to kind of nail down. So, but I enjoy writing, and one of the things that my wife has told me, she would read chapters of the book. I would let her read them, obviously, and she would say, "Oh, there's Brett." So I'm able to express myself better writing than I can verbally. So I need to utilize that gift more.
So you found a passion in the process of book writing.
Right. It is. It's a passion.
Well, we look forward to catching up and reading those next 2 or 3 or 12 books that you still have left in you.
I appreciate that. I'll hold you to that.
Appreciate it. Nice meeting you.
Thanks for joining us today, Brett, and have a good day, everyone.
You too.